fucking meant to stop it before then. Anyway, that's a bit of Paramore, and that's hopefully just a little bit of context on something I might be talking about over the next few minutes. So I'm not really going to be talking Paramore in this video. I'm going to be talking about this book right here. It's called By Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept. It's by an author called Elizabeth Smart, and it was published in 1945. So the title, it's a reference from the line in the Bible, from Psalms, by the rivers of Babylon, they sat down and wept. This is a passage in the Bible where the exiled Israelites are roaming the lands around, and they are feeling a sense of hopelessness, they are feeling bereft, and they lay down their musical instruments and they refuse to sing. So it's because they miss their homeland so much. So Smart is drawing an allusion between her feelings in this book, which is about complicated romance, I suppose you could reduce it down to saying, about an on-again, off-again relationship and all the different things she felt to do with that. So she's drawing an allusion between her sense of hopelessness and her sense of looking for an answer and a search for meaning. And she flips the phrase a bit on its head and uses a modern or 20th century reference by Grand Central Station instead of the rivers of Babylon. So this book here, it's dear to my heart, to be honest. It's a book I came across. It's referenced sometimes by, I found it referenced sometimes by quite depressing musicians who play really depressing music, which I happen to enjoy from time to time. So Morrissey of the Smiths was a huge big fan of Smart's writing and this book in particular. And also I think what I find intriguing about it is the tone of its writing and the way it approaches art, the way it approaches vulnerability, and the way it approaches the extremes of human emotion that you experience when you're in the tumult of love. It also really reminds me of late 90s, early 2000s emo music, which for my sins I'm quite a fan of as well. Exhibit A. So yeah, it would be a bit too much of a stretch to say that Morrissey, say, influenced emo, but that kind of music, the Smiths, early 2000s emo, also it's kind of part of a generalized process, I think, in art, and I think this book has an underrated role to play, and it's very important in this whole idea of the long kind of wrenching of the viable topics of art, be it visual art or music or writing or whatever, having to be about important people like kings or God or saints, etc., and can be about the tempestuous inner feelings of an ordinary person and how each ordinary person is actually extraordinary. And when somebody has the courage to fully express the extremes of your inner world, then that sometimes maybe it flirts between the line of bravery and stupidity, and some people say that this book jumps all over that line, but I do think it's a very momentous thing to do, and it's anytime I read this and I bask in it, I always just find myself enraptured in such admiration for what she was prepared to put out there. So this book, a little bit on the story behind it, it's a biographical tale. Elizabeth Smart, she fell in love with a man called George Barker, who was also a poet. She first came across his poetry writing in a bookshop in London when she was a young woman. She fell in love with his words, and right there and then on the spot she resolved that she would also fall in love with the man himself. So she used various different means to try and get into Barker's inner circle. One of them was that she used to actually come up with false identities. So for example, she posed as a manuscript collector to try and work her way in, become friends with people who he was friends with. And this actually did work, because they ended up meeting, they ended up really hitting it off, they fell in love. I would love to say that this began a healthy and long-standing relationship, but we wouldn't have had a book like this if it had. So Barker was already married, already had several children, and they engaged in an off-again, on-again affair for many years, which they could never really make public, and they had 4 children together as well. So, and to be honest, neither of them really come out altogether too well from this whole story. Smart comes across as one interpretation would be a bit manipulative, maybe just kind of a bit bizarrely impulsive, to change her life on its head based on reading a book of poetry and deciding, I'm going to go for this man. And then Barker definitely doesn't come across too well, because he kept this relationship covert, and he had, I think, something like 16 children in total, something along those lines. So it's all a bit morally sketchy, but what it definitely is a really, really impressive portrayal of the kind of reality, in many cases, of the exaggerated feelings and the topsy-turvy sensations you feel when you experience full-blown romantic love. And then coming a bit back to emo, so it is really, I think, quite in that vein, and really prescient, really ahead of its time, on the idea that it's almost like kind of like a high school romance in terms of its content. All the things we would get in that kind of emo, in that kind of early 2000s emo, and emo before, of course, of all is fair in love and war, even a sense of purposely, maybe even unnecessarily, sacrificing your mental and material well-being in order to grab the attention of the object of your affection. So, and Elizabeth Smart, her own mother, when she read this book, when it was published, and keep in mind this was published in the 1940s, so needless to say, it was, as you'll see from the reading I'll be doing in a few minutes, it was a highly controversial book, especially for a woman to be expressing such extreme vulnerability and to be open to expressing such exaggerated feelings of love. And I do emphasize exaggerated feelings, because it's like, again, a bit like emo. Sorry, I keep mentioning this, but it's kind of this idea that in order to capture the reality of love, you have to use unreal imagery and not plausible scenarios and over-the-top affection, over-the-top feelings of hurt and betrayal and cut me, I bleed rouge, and the whole flippin' gamut of the whole thing. So anyway, Smart's mother, her one-line review of the whole thing, or the main word she used to describe it, was erotomania. That's what she called this book. And then you think of, the likes of Pete Wentz, the likes of Hayley Williams, Gerard Way. I think erotomania is a pretty solid word to describe all of that type of music, all of that type of art. A little bit on prose poetry and why it's so rarely done so well, and what makes this book unique. So two major techniques she uses is very, very vivid repetition, and the passage I'm going to read in a moment, it's in my head I call it the Waters passage. So there's a huge amount of kind of recycling of metaphors and references and intricate wordplay and associative word association kind of experimentation going on. All words to do with like water, sea, fluidity, and I think it's trying to get at this idea that when you're experiencing full-blown romantic love, you are in just this total fluid state of not being able to keep up with your emotions, and when it's good, that's fantastic. You're walking around like you're on ice skates, you're just sliding down the street and the world is passing you by in the best way possible. So she uses an awful lot of repetition to kind of build up these different the different states of love and different natural imagery that goes with it during various different chapters of the book. Another thing she uses quite often to great effect is what's known as the anapest. So it's in terms of a metric foot in poetry, it's a line where there's 3 syllables and the third or last syllable is the stressed one. So a word that goes du-du-du, du-du-du. And to explain or to convey the feelings of love, a word she uses a lot in this is overcome, which again I think is a fairly solid word to describe all those feelings. So the word overcome, the third syllable of it, overcome, that's the stress syllable, and she will kind of, I think, goes for this because when you're, I suppose, in this book, because it's a covert relationship. Sometimes it feels like full love. Sometimes it feels like unrequited love. There's kind of a constant sense of waiting for this to really latch on to a viable relationship. So there's a sense of waiting a lot of the time, and then when the actual moments of physical affection and physical meeting happen, it's almost like they're too much, because there's so much waiting around, so much having to go out of state, to go to a B&B, to find a place to elope to temporarily. So I think something like using the anapest, it's a very clever way to kind of constantly keep inputting this sense of waiting, release, waiting, release. And I think it's done to very deliberate effect. One review of this book, just before I move on to reading the passage, called it exasperating and invigorating. And I think those are two words that I think perfectly describe, I think those are the two words that best describe the book. At times it's just so over the top, you're throwing your eyes to heaven, wondering why on earth would somebody write something like this. But at the same time, there's just something in it that just, I personally feel anyway, that just lights a fire inside. And I go from, throwing my eyes to heaven to being so impressed that somebody can express things in this way, to then going to the other extreme of actually even sometimes feeling jealous that somebody felt something this intense, and also jealous that they were prepared to put it on paper and publish it and everything like that. So all in all, it encapsulates all of those different things, and it treats love not in a minimalist way. You know, there's plenty of great examples of poets writing lovely sonnets about love and distilling all these feelings down into something neat. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? All that kind of jazz. But this is a maximalist expression of love. This is a maximalist way of considering the concept of love and writing it, and writing as somebody in love. And it's fundamentally, it writes of love on a mythical level, I think. So it's a mythic expression of love, will be my final selling point on this book. So I should have got some water. Hello. Fucker. Anyway. So, by the way, this is a part in the book. This is chapter 3, part 3, and it's when they first finally get to meet, and they first finally get to, after they've had an affair in London, when they're in America, and they go to somewhere in the southwest, I think it's Arizona or New Mexico, and they go and stay in a guest house run by a Mr. and Mrs. Wurtle, and it's this, and even I'm thinking now, so there's 2 chapters, and this is the 3rd chapter. And then the 3rd chapter is the release of them getting to meet. So it's like the anapest is constantly woven through this book in all sorts of different ways. So anyway, this is what I call the Waters passage in By Grand Central Station I Sat Down and Wept by Elizabeth Smart. Oh, the water of love that floods everything over, so that there is nothing the eye sees that is not covered in. There is no angle the world can assume which the love in my eye cannot make into a symbol of love. Even the precise geometry of his hand, when I gaze at it, dissolves me into water, and I flow away in a flood of love. Everything flows like the Mississippi over a devastated earth, which drinks unsurfeited and augments the liquid with waterfalls of gratitude, which raises a sound of praise to deafen all doubters forever, to burst their shared eardrums with the roar of proof, louder than bombs or screams or the inside ticking of remorse. Not all the poisonous tides of the blood I have spilt, can influence these tidals of love. But how can I go through the necessary daily motions when such an intense fusion turns the world to water? The overflow drenches all my implements of trivial intercourse. I stare in incomprehension at the simplest question from a stranger, standing as if bewitched, half smiling, like an idiot, feeling this fiery fluid spill out of my eyes. I am possessed by love and have no options. When the Ford rattles up to the door, 5 minutes, 5 years late, and he walks across the lawn under the pepper trees, I stand behind the gauze curtains, unable to move to meet him or to speak, as I turn to liquid to invade his every orifice when he opens the door. More single purpose than the new bird, all mouth with his one want. I close my eyes and tremble, anticipating the heaven of actual touch. When we lie near the swimming pool in the sun, he comes through the bamboo bushes like land emerging from chaos. But I am the land, and he is the face upon the waters. He is the moon upon the tides, the dew, the rain, all seeds and all the honey of love. My bones are crushed like bamboo trees. I am the earth the plants grow through, but when they sprout, I will also be a god. And there is so much more for me. I am suddenly so rich, and I have done nothing to deserve it, to be so overloaded. All after such a desert, all after I had learned to say, I am nothing, and I deserve nothing. The thick pines drop globular cones, the dishevelled palms, with their pantaloons falling down their trunks, say, it has happened, the miracle has arrived, everything begins today, everything you touch is born, the new moon attended by 2 enormous stars, the sunny day fading with a glow to exhilaration, all the paraphernalia of existence, all my sad companions of these last 20 years, the pots and pans in Miss Wirtle's kitchen, ribbons of streets, wilted geraniums, thin children's legs, all the world solicits me with joy, leaps at me electrically, claiming its birth at last. When we tear ourselves out of the night and come into the kitchen, Mrs. Wirtle says, romance, eh? But she smiles, she turns away her head, and when we kiss behind her back as we help her dry the dishes, she says, oh, you two lovebirds, go on out again. What's going to happen? Nothing, for everything has happened. All time is now, and all time can do no better. Nothing can ever be more now than now, and before this nothing was. There are no minor facts in life, there is only the one tremendous one. We can include the world in our love, and no irritations can disrupt it, not even envy. Mr. Wirtle, sitting on the sofa late at night, says, with a legal air, then I have it from you there is such a thing as love. I lean upon the cushion, faint from his few hours' separation, but I sigh, yes, oh yes. And then, as if he were describing other worlds, diminutive, so petty I smother them in pity, he describes his intrigues, he bandies the word that was in the beginning. But the noise of my inside seas, the dazzle of this cataclysmic birth of love inside me, cannot hear clearly what he says. To make a response is like rousing a heavy sleeper who longs to remain asleep. I smile, but I am in a trance. There is no reality but love. I cannot hear beneath his subtle words the beginning of the world's antagonism, the hatred of the mediocre for all miracles. All I want is for everyone to go away and leave me 1,000 lives in which to muse, only to muse on this state of completion. I was taunted so long. The meaning fluttered above my head. All was out of reach. Now it has come to rest in me. It has pierced the very centre of the circle. I love, 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 but he is also all those things. The night, the resilient mornings, the tall poinsettias and hydrangeas, the lemon trees, the residential palms, the fruit and vegetables in gorgeous rows, the bird in the pepper tree, the sun on the swimming pool. There is no room for pity of anything. In a bleeding heart I should find only exhilaration in the richness of red. Once I skulked wistfully through the dim streets, aching after this unknown, hoping to pass by unnoticed in my drab dress and lopsided shoes with high heels, hoping, thus surreptitiously, to come upon it. But I was afraid, I was timid, and I did not believe. I hoped. I thought it would be like a bird in the hand, not a wild sea that treated me like flotsam. But I have become part of the earth. I am one of its waves flooding and leaping. I am the same tune now as the trees, hummingbirds, sky, fruits, vegetables in rows. I am all or any of these. I can metamorphose at will. Do you need some joy or love? Are you sodden leaves in some forsaken yard? Are you deserted or cold or starved or paralysed or blind? handfuls and handfuls for you and to spare. Make them up into bed socks, tea cozies, cushions against the cold, for their electricity is perpetual warmth and can contaminate everything and build at one touch a new and adorable world. This is today. This is where all roads strove to lead, all feet to attain. What are the world's problems and sorrows and errors? I am as at sea, and as ignorant and mystified as the first day I ever saw algebra. There are no problems, no sorrows or errors. They join in the urging song that everything sings. This is the state of the angels that spend their hours only singing the praises of the Lord. Just to lie savouring is enough, life is enough. That was the Waters passage from Elizabeth Smart's by Sandra Grand Central Station. I sat down and wept, and I'd say goodbye to you now from my underground, under the sea lair, blue dabba-dee, dabba-die.